Don't talk to her. She's just the help. The words sliced through the marble lobby like a blade, and 72-year-old Renee Carter felt her world shatter. Standing in the resort she secretly owned, watching her daughter-in-law humiliate her in front of strangers, she realized the cruelest betrayal comes from those who should love you most. What happens when a billionaire matriarch discovers her own family sees her as worthless? Stay with me until the end of this incredible story and comment your city, so I can see how far this tale of hidden power and ultimate revenge travels across the world. The morning sun cast long shadows across the polished marble floor of the coastal paradise resort as I stood in the lobby, my weathered hands trembling slightly as I gripped my worn leather handbag. At 72, I should have been enjoying the golden years of my life, surrounded by the love and respect of my family. Instead, I found myself in a nightmare I never could have imagined. Mom, hurry up. We don't have all day. Jay's voice carried across the expansive lobby sharp, with the kind of impatience that had become his trademark whenever he spoke to me. My son, my only child. The boy I had carried for 9 months, nursed through countless sleepless nights, and built an empire for stood near the reception desk with his wife Valentina, their 2 children fidgeting beside them. I quickened my pace, my sensible shoes making soft clicking sounds against the marble. The resort was magnificent, even more beautiful than I remembered from my last inspection 6 months ago. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls from the vaulted ceiling, and tropical plants created lush green corners throughout the space. Guests moved through the lobby with the relaxed confidence that came from knowing they could afford luxury, their designer clothing and expensive luggage marking them as members of an exclusive club. If only they knew that the elderly woman hurrying across their pristine floor was the one who had made it all possible. Renee, there you are. Valentina's voice rang out sweet as poison honey. She wore a flowing white sundress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the light as she turned toward me. At 35, she was everything I had never been: tall, elegant, with the kind of effortless beauty that opened doors and turned heads. She was also everything I had learned to despise: shallow, materialistic, and cruel, in ways that cut deeper than any physical wound. "I'm sorry, dear," I said, slightly breathless from my walk across the lobby. The taxi took longer than expected. Valentina's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Well, we're here now. I suppose that's what matters." She turned to the young woman behind the reception desk, her voice taking on the imperious tone she used when talking to what she considered the help. "We have a reservation under Morrison, J. Morrison. I believe it's the presidential suite." The receptionist, whose name tag read Carmen, smiled professionally. "Of course, Mrs. Morrison. I have your reservation right here." She began typing on her computer, her fingers flying over the keys. "I just need to verify a few details and we'll have you checked in immediately." "Good," Valentina said, then turned to look at me with barely concealed disgust. "And make sure you understand she's not part of our group." She gestured toward me with a dismissive wave of her manicured hand. "She's just helping us with the children." The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my face flush with embarrassment as Carmen's professional smile faltered for just a moment. Around us, other guests continued their conversations, but I was acutely aware that some had turned to look at our little drama unfolding near the reception desk. I'm sorry I don't understand," Carmen said, her voice carefully neutral. Valentina sighed dramatically. "She's the help, the nanny, whatever you want to call it. Just make sure she understands her place here. We don't want any confusion." My heart hammered against my ribs as I stood there frozen in humiliation. The marble floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet, and I felt suddenly dizzy. This was my hotel, my lobby. These were my guests, my employees, my empire built from decades of sacrifice and determination. Yet here I stood being dismissed as nothing more than hired help by my own daughter-in-law while my son watched in silence. Mom, don't just stand there, Jay said, his voice carrying that familiar note of irritation. Help the kids with their bags. I looked at my son, really looked at him. At 42, Jay had inherited my dark hair, though his was now showing threads of silver at the temples. He had his father's height and broad shoulders, but where David had carried himself with quiet dignity, Jay moved through the world with the careless arrogance of someone who had never wanted for anything. His expensive suit hung perfectly on his frame, and his Rolex caught the light as he gestured impatiently. When had he become this stranger? When had the little boy who used to crawl into my lap for bedtime stories transformed into a man who could watch his wife humiliate his mother without saying a word? Of course, I whispered, moving toward my grandchildren. 10-year-old Emma was clutching a designer backpack that probably cost more than many people's cars, while 8-year-old Marcus struggled with a rolling suitcase that was clearly too big for him. Both children had inherited their parents' good looks: Emma, with her mother's blonde hair and bright blue eyes, Marcus, with his father's darker coloring but the same piercing gaze. Here, sweetheart, let me help you, I said to Marcus, reaching for the handle of his suitcase. I can do it myself, he said, pulling away from me with the kind of casual cruelty that children learn from their parents. Mom says you're just here to carry stuff anyway. The words were like shards of glass in my chest. I stood there for a moment, staring down at my grandson, this child I had showered with love and expensive gifts, whose college fund I had already fully funded, who would inherit more wealth than he could spend in 3 lifetimes, and saw nothing but indifference in his young face. Marcus, I said softly, I'm your grandmother. He shrugged, already losing interest in the conversation. Mom says you like to pretend you're important, but you're not really family, not the kind that matters. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them back. I would not cry. Not here, not in front of these people, not in the lobby of the empire I had built with my own hands. Carmen finished processing their reservation and handed Jay the key cards. You're all set, Mr. Morrison. The presidential suite is on the top floor. Would you like someone to help with your luggage? That won't be necessary, Jay said, pocketing the cards. She can handle it. He nodded toward me without even looking in my direction. As we made our way toward the elevator, I caught a glimpse of our reflection in the polished brass doors. There was Jay, tall and confident in his expensive clothes, looking every inch the successful businessman he pretended to be. Valentina walked beside him, her head held high, designer handbags swinging from her perfectly manicured fingers. The children flanked them, already learning to carry themselves with the casual entitlement of the wealthy. And there was me trailing behind with their luggage invisible and dismissed. The woman who had built everything they took for granted reduced to nothing more than an aging servant in their eyes. The elevator ride to the penthouse was conducted in silence, broken only by Emma's complaints about being tired and Marcus's demands for ice cream. I stood in the corner holding their bags, watching the floors tick by on the digital display. Each number that passed felt like another step away from the woman I used to be, the woman I still was, despite their perception of me. When the doors opened to reveal the presidential suite, Valentina let out a delighted gasp. Oh my God, Jay, this is incredible. And it was. I had personally overseen the design of this space 3 years ago, sparing no expense to create something truly magnificent. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered breathtaking views of the ocean, while the interior combined classic elegance with modern luxury. The living area was spacious enough to host a small party with cream-colored leather furniture arranged around a marble coffee table. Fresh orchids graced every surface, and the air carried the subtle scent of vanilla and sea breeze from the custom aromatherapy system I had installed. This must cost a fortune, Valentina breathed, running her fingers along the silk curtains. How did you manage to get us a room like this? Jay's jaw tightened slightly. I told you I've been working some big deals lately. We can afford nice things now. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. The big deals Jay referred to were the monthly allowance I deposited into his account, $50,000 that appeared like clockwork, no questions asked, no expectations attached. He had no job, no income of his own, no skills that any employer would value. He was a 42-year-old man living entirely off his mother's wealth while telling his wife he was a successful businessman. But I said nothing. I had been saying nothing for years, watching my money flow out to support their lifestyle while they treated me like an embarrassment they were forced to tolerate. Renee, Valentina's voice cut through my thoughts. Put our bags in the master bedroom. And be careful with my cosmetics case. It has some very expensive items in it. I nodded and began moving their luggage, my back protesting with each heavy bag I lifted. At 72, I should have been relaxing, maybe playing bridge with friends or tending to a garden. Instead, I was hauling suitcases for people who couldn't even be bothered to say please. The master bedroom was as stunning as the rest of the suite, with a king-size bed dressed in Egyptian cotton linens and a private balcony overlooking the ocean. I set their bags down, carefully arranging them the way I imagined a proper hotel employee would. "The children's room is down the hall," Jay called out. "Make sure you get them settled, too." I spent the next hour unpacking their belongings, hanging up expensive dresses, and organizing toiletries, while the family explored their luxurious accommodations. Through the bedroom door, I could hear them exclaiming over the amenities: the marble bathroom with its soaking tub, the fully stocked bar, the private dining area where they could order room service. Everything they were marveling at, I had paid for, not just this room, but the entire resort. Every marble tile, every silk cushion, every piece of artwork on the walls, all of it had been purchased with money from my empire. They were tourists in a world I had created, and they didn't even know it. When I finally finished with the unpacking, I found the family gathered on the main balcony, already changed into resort wear and sipping champagne that cost more per bottle than most people spend on groceries in a month. "There you are," Valentina said without looking at me. "We're going down to the pool now. You can stay here and, I don't know, clean up or something. The children made a mess with their snacks." I looked around the pristine suite. There was no mess. There was barely any evidence that anyone had been in the rooms beyond a few towels that had been used in the bathrooms. "Actually," I said carefully, "I was hoping we could spend some time together as a family. It's been so long since—" "Oh, please," Valentina interrupted, her voice dripping with disdain. "This is our vacation, our time to relax and enjoy ourselves. We don't need you hovering around trying to insert yourself into every moment." Jay finally spoke up, but not in my defense. "Mom, just give us some space, okay? We'll call you if we need anything." The dismissal was casual, almost careless, as if he were shooing away a persistent salesperson rather than speaking to the woman who had given him life and everything he possessed. I watched them leave, their laughter echoing down the hallway as the elevator doors closed behind them. Then I was alone in the presidential suite, the suite I owned in the hotel I owned, surrounded by luxury. I had paid for feeling more isolated and worthless than I had ever felt in my life. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked out at the ocean. The water was a brilliant turquoise under the afternoon sun, stretching endlessly toward the horizon. Somewhere out there, cruise ships carried happy families on vacation adventures. Beach resorts along other coasts welcomed guests who came to create memories with people they loved. But here I stood in paradise, feeling like I was in hell. The irony wasn't lost on me. 40 years ago, I had been a young widow with a 6-year-old son and nothing but determination. David had died in a car accident, leaving me with a mountain of debt and a child to raise alone. Everyone had expected me to crumble, to rely on charity or family support to survive. Instead, I had done the impossible. I started with nothing, cleaning offices at night while Jay slept, saving every penny I could scrape together. I bought a rundown motel on the outskirts of Miami with a loan that took me 15 years to pay off. I worked 18-hour days doing everything from changing linens to fixing leaky faucets. I painted walls, planted flowers, and slowly transformed that dying property into something special. One motel became two, two became five, five became a chain. And eventually, through decades of sacrifice and determination, I had built coastal paradise resorts, 17 luxury properties across Florida, the Caribbean, and the Bahamas, properties that generated hundreds of millions in revenue each year, properties that employed thousands of people and provided vacations for hundreds of thousands more. I had done it all for Jay. Every missed school play, every birthday spent working, every relationship I never pursued because I was too busy building his future, it had all been for him. I wanted him to have what I never had: security, comfort, a life free from the fear of poverty. But somewhere along the way, something had gone terribly wrong. Maybe it was when I hired nannies to help raise him while I worked. Maybe it was when I sent him to expensive private schools where he learned to value appearances over substance. Maybe it was when I bought him his first car, his first apartment, his first taste of luxury without requiring him to earn any of it. Or maybe it was when he met Valentina. They had married 10 years ago in a wedding that cost more than most people's houses. I had paid for everything from the designer dress to the honeymoon in Europe. I had been so happy that my son had found love, so eager to welcome Valentina into our family. I should have seen the signs then, the way she looked at me with calculation rather than warmth, the way she encouraged Jay to distance himself from his past, meaning me and the modest lifestyle we had known before the real wealth started flowing, the way she gradually poisoned him against the very person who made their privileged life possible. Now, 10 years later, I was reaping what I had sown. I had raised a son who took my generosity for granted and married a woman who saw me as an obstacle to their happiness rather than its source. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. "Jasmine speaking." "It's me," I said quietly. Jasmine Torres had been my assistant for 15 years, the closest thing I had to a real friend. She was the only person who knew my true identity, the only one who understood the strange double life I lived. To the business world, I was R.C. Carter, the reclusive billionaire who owned coastal paradise resorts. To my family, I was just Renee, the elderly woman they tolerated out of some misplaced sense of duty. "Mrs. Carter, how are you? Are you at the Miami property?" "I am." I kept my voice low even though I was alone in the suite. "Jasmine, I need you to do something for me." "Of course. What do you need, I want you to monitor all charges to the presidential suite, everything: room service, spa treatments, shopping activities. I want a detailed record of every dollar they spend." There was a pause. "Are you sure that could get expensive quickly?" I almost laughed. "I'm aware. Just do it. And Jasmine, make sure the staff knows to treat them like any other guests. No special considerations." "Understood." "Mrs. Carter, are you all right? You sound—" "I'm fine," I lied. "I'll talk to you soon." I ended the call and returned to staring out at the ocean. Down below, I could see the pool area where my family was undoubtedly enjoying themselves. The resort was busy with guests lounging on comfortable chairs, children playing, and the water servers moving efficiently between tables with drinks and snacks. It was exactly what I had envisioned when I designed this place: a paradise where families could come together, where memories were made and bonds were strengthened. I had created something beautiful, something that brought joy to thousands of people every year. But for my own family, I had apparently created nothing more than an expensive playground where they could pretend I didn't exist. The afternoon stretched endlessly before me. I had nowhere to go, nothing to do. I was a stranger in my own hotel, a ghost haunting the margins of my family's vacation. Eventually, I lay down on the couch in the living area and closed my eyes. The sound of the ocean through the open balcony doors should have been soothing, but instead it seemed to echo the loneliness that had settled in my chest like a weight. This was only the first day of what was supposed to be a week-long family vacation. 6 more days of being treated like hired help in the empire I had built with my own hands. As I drifted toward an uneasy sleep, I found myself wondering how much more I could take. How many more times I could stand there silently while they diminished me, dismissed me, pretended I was nothing more than an inconvenience they had to tolerate. I had no idea that I was about to find out exactly what my breaking point looked like. The evening brought no relief from the humiliation. When my family finally returned to the suite, they were glowing with the satisfaction of a perfect day in paradise. Their skin was sun-kissed, their hair tousled by ocean breezes, and their voices filled with excitement as they recounted their adventures. "The infinity pool is incredible," Valentina gushed as she kicked off her designer sandals, "and the service at the poolside bar absolutely impeccable. I must have had 6 pina coladas." "The kids love the water slides, Valentin," Jay added, loosening his resort shirt. "And I got in a good workout at the fitness center, top of the line equipment." I watched them from my position on the couch, still in the same clothes I had worn that morning. While they had spent the day enjoying amenities I had paid for, I had remained in the suite like an unwanted pet, waiting for them to return. "I'm starving," Emma announced, throwing herself dramatically onto one of the leather chairs. "Can we order room service?" "Of course, sweetheart," Valentina said, already reaching for the leather-bound menu. "Let's see what they have." "Oh my God, Jay, look at this. Lobster filet mignon champagne service. This place really is 5-star." She flipped through the pages with obvious delight, pointing out dishes to Jay while the children clustered around them. I might as well have been invisible. "Should we order for 4?" Jay asked, and for a moment my heart lifted. Maybe they were finally going to include me. "4? Oh, you mean for us and the kids? Yes, of course." Valentina didn't even glance in my direction. "I'm sure she can find something in the kitchen if she's hungry." The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. I sat there listening to them plan an elaborate dinner that would cost more than most people spend on food in a month, while they relegated me to scrounging for leftovers like a stray dog. "Actually," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "I haven't eaten all day." The room fell silent. Valentina looked up from the menu with barely concealed irritation while Jay's expression darkened. "Well, that's your own fault," Valentina said coolly. "You could have ordered something while we were out. It's not our responsibility to make sure you feed yourself." I don't have access to room service," I said, feeling heat rise in my cheeks. "The charges go to your account." Jay made an exasperated sound. "For God's sake, Mom, it's just food. Order something simple, a sandwich or something. Just don't go overboard." Don't go overboard. In a hotel where a simple sandwich cost $45, my own son was warning me not to go overboard while his family prepared to feast on lobster and champagne. "Thank you," I whispered. The words tasted like ashes in my mouth, but I said them anyway. "Thank you for permission to eat in my own hotel. Thank you for allowing me the basic dignity of not starving while I watched them gorge themselves on luxury." They placed their order an extravagant spread that would have fed a family of 8, while I quietly requested a simple chicken salad sandwich and a glass of water. The contrast wasn't lost on anyone in the room, least of all me. When the food arrived, delivered by a server who recognized me but said nothing, I watched my family dive into their feast with the enthusiasm of people who had never known want. The lobster was perfectly prepared, the steaks were cooked to perfection, and the champagne flowed freely. I sat in the corner with my sandwich, trying to make myself as small and unobtrusive as possible. The chicken salad was actually quite good, I should know, since I had personally approved the recipe, but it might as well have been cardboard for all the enjoyment I got from it. "This champagne is incredible," Valentina said, holding up her glass to catch the light. "Dom Perignon. Only the best for my girls," Jay said, leaning over to kiss her cheek. I remembered when he used to say things like that to me. When I was his girl, his mom, the most important woman in his world. Now I watched him lavish affection on a woman who treated his mother like dirt while he pretended not to notice. After dinner, they settled in to watch a movie on the suite's massive television. It was a romantic comedy, the kind of light entertainment perfect for a family vacation. I thought perhaps this was my chance to be included, to sit with them and share in something normal and pleasant. "I think I'll turn in early," I announced, standing up from my corner chair. Good idea, Valentina said without taking her eyes off the screen. You look tired. It wasn't an invitation to stay. It was a dismissal as clear as if she had pointed toward the door. I retreated to the small servants' quarters connected to the suite, a space originally designed for personal assistants or nannies who might accompany wealthy guests. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was sleeping in quarters I had designed for people exactly like what my family now considered me to be. The room was comfortable enough with a single bed, a small dresser, and a compact bathroom. But lying there in the darkness, listening to the muffled sounds of my family enjoying themselves in the main suite, I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare from which I couldn't wake up. This was my empire. These were my hotels, my staff, my vision made real. I employed thousands of people, generated hundreds of millions in revenue, and commanded respect throughout the hospitality industry. But here in the world I had built, I was nothing more than an unwanted burden sleeping in the servants' quarters while my family enjoyed the presidential suite. I stared up at the ceiling, tears finally coming after a day of holding them back. They fell silently, soaking into the pillow as I grieved for the relationship I thought I had with my son, for the family I thought we were, for the respect I had apparently never earned, despite everything I had sacrificed. Tomorrow would bring another day of this humiliation, and the day after that, and the day after that for the rest of what was supposed to be a wonderful week together. But as I lay there in the darkness, something began to shift inside me. The tears of sadness were slowly being replaced by something else, something harder, more determined. I had built an empire from nothing. I had survived poverty, widowhood, and decades of struggle to create something magnificent. I had faced down competitors, weathered economic storms, and overcome every obstacle in my path. I was not going to lie here and accept this treatment forever. The question was, what was I going to do about it? The morning light filtering through the servants' quarters felt different, somehow sharper and more insistent than the gentle glow I had awakened to yesterday. I had barely slept, my mind churning with memories and possibilities, anger and determination warring in my chest like opposing armies. But as I lay there listening to the distant sounds of my family beginning their day in the main suite, I realized something fundamental had changed during those dark hours. I was done being invisible. I dressed carefully in the same simple clothes I had worn yesterday, but this time I stood straighter, held my head higher. In the small mirror above the dresser, I saw not a broken down old woman, but someone who had survived every challenge life had thrown at her. The reflection staring back at me had built something extraordinary from nothing. Today I was going to remember who that person really was. The sounds from the main suite grew louder as I approached the door. Valentina's high-pitched complaints about the water pressure, Jay's booming laugh at something on his phone, the children's demands for breakfast. The symphony of entitlement that had become the soundtrack of my family's life. There you are, Valentina said without looking up from her phone as I entered the living area. She was sprawled across the cream leather sofa in a silk robe that probably cost more than most people's rent, her blonde hair perfectly tousled in that effortless way that actually required considerable effort to achieve. The children need breakfast, and I want fresh fruit and yogurt. None of that processed garbage they usually serve at hotels. I stood there for a moment, really looking at her. 10 years ago, when Jay had first brought her home, I had been so eager to welcome her into our family. She had seemed sweet then, maybe a little materialistic, but I had told myself that was just youth. I had showered her with gifts, paid for their honeymoon, and handed her a life of luxury without ever asking what she might give back. Now I could see what I had been too blind to notice, then the casual cruelty in her eyes, the way she spoke about people she considered beneath her, the complete absence of gratitude for everything she had been given. "I'm not room service, Valentina," I said quietly. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun. Valentina's head snapped up from her phone, her perfectly plucked eyebrows rising in surprise. Jay, who had been lounging in one of the chairs with his own device, suddenly went very still. "Excuse me." Valentina's voice was sharp with disbelief. "I said I'm not room service. I'm your mother-in-law. I'm Jay's mother. I'm their grandmother." I gestured toward Emma and Marcus, who were watching this exchange with the fascinated horror of children sensing adult drama. I'm not your servant. Jay finally spoke, his voice carrying a warning tone I remembered from his teenage years. Mom, don't start. We're on vacation. Yes, we are, I agreed. We're supposed to be on a family vacation together, but instead you've turned me into unpaid help while you pretend I don't exist unless you need something carried or someone blamed. Valentina stood up, her silk robe billowing around her like the wings of an angry bird. I cannot believe this. We bring you on this amazing vacation to this incredible resort, and this is how you repay us, with drama and accusations. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. You brought me Valentina. Do you have any idea how much this suite costs per night? Jay handles the finances, she said dismissively, waving her hand as if money were something too vulgar for her to contemplate. I turned to my son. Jay, do you want to tell your wife how you're paying for this? His face had gone pale, and I could see the muscle in his jaw twitching the way it did when he was cornered. Mom, stop it. Just stop. Stop what? Stop asking to be treated with basic respect. Stop expecting my own family to acknowledge that I'm a human being with feelings. My voice was rising despite my efforts to stay calm, or stop asking questions about where your money comes from. What money? Valentina demanded, looking between Jay and me with growing confusion. Jay, what is she talking about? Jay's silence stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. I could see him calculating, trying to figure out how to maintain his lie without completely destroying his marriage, the same way he had been calculating for years, living off my generosity while pretending to be someone he wasn't. Jay works very hard. He finally said, the words sounding hollow even to him. Doing what? I pressed. What job do you go to, Jay? What company pays you? What service do you provide that generates the kind of income needed to afford presidential suites and designer clothes and private schools for the children? Valentina's confusion was shifting into something sharper, more dangerous. Jay, what is she talking about? Mom, please, Jay said, and for the first time in years I heard something other than irritation in his voice. Fear, desperation. Don't do this. Don't do what? Tell the truth. Tell your wife that the $50,000 that appears in your account every month comes from me, that every vacation, every designer handbag, every expensive dinner comes from your mother's money. The silence that followed was deafening. Emma and Marcus sat frozen on the couch, their eyes wide with the kind of shock that comes from watching the adult world reveal its ugly secrets. Valentina's face had gone through several colors, settling on a sickly pale green that clashed with her expensive robe. $50,000, she whispered. Every month, I confirmed. For 10 years. Jay doesn't work, Valentina. He's never worked, not a single day since you married him. He lives entirely off the allowance I give him. Valentina turned to stare at her husband, and I could see the exact moment when pieces began falling into place in her mind. The mysterious business calls that never seemed to result in actual meetings, the vague explanations about his work, the way he never brought colleagues home or talked about office politics. You told me you were a consultant, she said slowly. Jay ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from his childhood when he was caught in a lie. I am in a way. I consult with Mom about investments. What investments? I asked, genuinely curious to hear this fabrication. You know, the portfolio stuff, the business decisions. It would have been funny if it weren't so pathetic. Jay knew nothing about my business beyond the fact that it generated enough money to fund his lifestyle. He had never shown the slightest interest in how the empire was built or how it operated. He couldn't tell you the difference between a profit margin and a pork rind. Jay, Valentina's voice was very quiet now, which somehow made it more terrifying than if she had been screaming. Are you telling me that for 10 years, while I've been bragging to my friends about my successful husband, you've been living off your mother's charity? It's not charity, Jay said defensively. It's family money. It's complicated. No, I said firmly. It's not complicated at all. It's charity. Money I give you out of love, expecting nothing in return except basic respect and kindness, neither of which I've received. Valentina sank back onto the couch, her perfect composure finally cracking. Oh my God. Oh my God, do you know what this means? Do you know how this makes me look? Not how it made Jay look, not how it affected their marriage or their family, how it made her look. Even in crisis, Valentina's primary concern was her image, her social standing, her precious reputation built on lies. Mommy, Emma's small voice cut through the tension. Are we poor? The question hit like a slap. These children who had never wanted for anything, who attended private schools and took European vacations and owned more toys than they could possibly play with, were afraid they might be poor because they had just learned their father didn't have a job. No, sweetheart, I said gently. You're not poor. But Daddy doesn't work, Marcus said, his 8-year-old logic cutting straight to the heart of the matter. How can we have money if Daddy doesn't work? Jay looked like he might be sick. Kids, adults have complicated arrangements. You wouldn't understand. I understand, Emma said with the brutal honesty of a 10-year-old. Grandma Renee gives us money, and you pretend you earned it. Out of the mouths of babes. This child had grasped in seconds what her parents had been hiding behind elaborate pretenses for years. Emma, Valentina snapped, don't be rude. How is that rude? Emma asked. It's true, isn't it? That's what you just said. Valentina stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the ocean. This is a disaster. An absolute disaster. What am I supposed to tell people? What am I supposed to say when they ask about Jay's work? You could try the truth, I suggested. She whirled around, her eyes blazing. The truth is humiliating. Do you know what my friends will say when they find out I've been married to a kept man for 10 years? A kept man. Jay's voice was sharp with hurt. Valentina, that's my mother you're talking about. That's family money. It's charity, she shrieked. It's handouts. It's welfare. The words hit Jay like physical blows. I watched my son's face crumble as his wife stripped away every pretense, every comfortable lie he had built his identity around. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. So what now? I asked quietly. What happens now that the truth is out? Valentina's pacing became more frantic. We have to fix this. We have to figure out how to what? Keep living the lie. It's not a lie, Jay exploded. It's family. It's what families do for each other. Is it? I turned to face him fully. Is that what families do? Because I have to tell you, Jay, I'm not feeling very much family love lately. Yesterday, your wife told the hotel staff not to speak to me because I was just the help. Your children have been taught to treat me like a servant. You've spent this entire trip pretending I don't exist unless you need something. That's not, Jay started, then stopped. Because it was true, and we all knew it. You want to talk about family, I continued. Let me tell you about family. Family means respect. Family means gratitude. Family means not being ashamed of the people who love you. We're not ashamed of you, Jay said weakly. Aren't you? When was the last time you introduced me to your friends as your mother? When was the last time you invited me to a social event, a dinner party, anything where your real life intersects with mine? The silence stretched between us. Jay's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but no words came out. That's what I thought, I said. You take my money, but you don't want me. You want the lifestyle I provide, but not the woman who provides it. Valentina had stopped pacing and was staring at me with something that looked almost like hatred. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Destroying our family, ruining our vacation. I'm not destroying anything, Valentina. I'm just tired of pretending that what we have is actually a family. So what do you want? She demanded. What is this really about? More control? More guilt trips? What? The question hung in the air, and I realized I didn't have a simple answer. What did I want? Respect, love, acknowledgement. All of those things seemed so far out of reach, now poisoned by years of resentment and lies. I want to feel like I matter, I said finally. I want to feel like the woman who built everything you take for granted deserves more than being treated like an inconvenience. Built what? Valentina's voice was sharp with skepticism. What exactly have you built? A few hotels. A few hotels. I stared at her, this woman who had lived in luxury for a decade without ever asking where it came from or how it was earned. This woman who had just learned that her entire lifestyle was funded by the inconvenience standing in front of her. A few hotels, I repeated slowly. Mom has a small hospitality business, Jay said quickly, obviously trying to minimize the scope of what I had accomplished. Some properties in Florida, 17 resort properties across Florida, the Caribbean, and the Bahamas, employing over 8,000 people and generating nearly $500 million in annual revenue. Some properties. How small? Valentina asked, and I could see the calculation in her eyes. She was trying to figure out exactly how much money was involved, how much her lifestyle might be at risk. Jay shot me a warning look. Small enough. Nothing to worry about. But Emma, blessed with a child's perfect memory and lack of social filter, piped up from the couch. Daddy, remember when we drove past that big hotel in Orlando, the really pretty one with all the flowers? You said that was one of Grandma Renee's hotels, and there were lots of people working there. Jay's face went white. Emma, that's not... You're remembering wrong. No, I'm not, Emma insisted with the stubborn certainty of a 10-year-old. You said Grandma Renee owned hotels, lots of them. You said that's why we could afford nice things. Valentina's head snapped around to stare at Jay. Lots of them. Emma's confused, Jay said desperately, that she's just a kid. She doesn't understand. But the damage was done. I could see Valentina's mind working, putting together pieces she had never bothered to examine before. The consistent flow of money that never seemed to dry up. The casual way Jay could afford whatever she wanted without ever seeming to worry about budgets. The expensive gifts that appeared on birthdays and holidays without any corresponding financial stress. How many hotels? She asked me directly. Jay jumped in before I could answer. Mom, don't. Please, this isn't... We don't need to get into specifics. How many, Valentina repeated, her voice harder now. I looked at my son, this man I had raised and provided for and loved unconditionally, and saw nothing but fear and shame in his eyes. Fear that his wife would discover the full extent of his deception. Shame that he had built his entire adult life on a foundation of lies. 17, I said quietly. The number seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Valentina's mouth fell open while Jay looked like he might collapse. 17 hotels, Valentina whispered. 17 resort properties, I corrected. Luxury resorts, including this one. The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. I watched Valentina's face go through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, calculation, and finally something that looked almost like awe. This one, she repeated slowly. You own this resort? I own all of them. Coastal Paradise Resorts. I built the company from a single rundown motel I bought with a loan 36 years ago. Valentina sank back onto the couch as if her legs could no longer support her. You own this place, this entire resort. The presidential suite we're staying in, the pools your children played in yesterday, the restaurants where you ate, the spa where you planned to spend the afternoon, all of it. Mine. Jay was staring at me with something approaching horror. Mom, why did you tell her that? Because I'm tired of hiding, Jay. I'm tired of pretending to be less than I am so you can feel comfortable with your lies. Valentina's voice was barely a whisper. Oh my God. Oh my God. Do you know what this means? I wasn't sure I wanted to know what she thought it meant. The look in her eyes was shifting from shock to something else, something that made me deeply uncomfortable. It means, she said, her voice growing stronger, that we're rich, really truly rich. No, I said firmly. It means I'm rich. There's a difference. But Valentina wasn't listening. I could practically see the dollar signs in her eyes as she processed this new information. 17 luxury resorts. My God, what must that be worth? Hundreds of millions. The precise number was none of her business, but she wasn't wrong. Conservative estimates put the value of coastal paradise resorts at just over $800 million, not counting the various other investments and properties I owned. Jay, Valentina turned to her husband with an expression I had never seen before, not love, not affection, but pure, undisguised greed. Do you realize what this means for us, for our future, for the children? Valentina, don't, Jay said weakly. Don't what? Don't be excited that we're part of a hotel empire. Don't be thrilled that our children will never want for anything. You're not part of anything, I said sharply. The business is mine. The money is mine. The empire, as you call it, belongs to me. She looked at me with the patient expression of someone explaining something obvious to a slow child. But Jay is your son, your only child. That makes us family, and family shares, right? Isn't that what you just said? The breathtaking audacity of it left me speechless for a moment. This woman who had spent the last 24 hours treating me like hired help was now claiming her right to my fortune based on family bonds she had spent years trying to sever. Family shares respect, I said slowly. Family shares love. Family shares kindness and consideration. Money is something else entirely. But surely you're planning to leave everything to Jay, she pressed. I mean, he's your only heir. The word heir sent a chill down my spine. She was already planning my death, already dividing up assets I had spent 4 decades building. I haven't decided what I'm leaving to anyone, I said. For the first time since this conversation began, Jay looked truly alarmed. Mom, what do you mean you haven't decided I'm your son? Your only child. Of course you're leaving everything to me. Of course, I repeated. Based on what? Based on the respect you've shown me, based on the gratitude you've expressed for everything I've given you, based on the love and kindness you've demonstrated, based on the fact that I'm your son, he exploded. That's how families work. Parents provide for their children. Children usually grow up eventually, I said. They usually become adults who contribute something to the world, who show appreciation for what they've been given, who treat their parents with love and respect even when those parents grow old. I do respect you, Jay said, but the words sounded hollow. Do you? Is that what you call making me carry your luggage while you pretend I'm the hired help? Is that what you call sitting silently while your wife humiliates me in public? Is that what you call lying about where your money comes from while you take credit for my life's work? Each question hit him like a physical blow, and I could see him shrinking back into the defensive teenager he had never quite stopped being. We were just, it was supposed to be easier this way, he said weakly. Easier for whom? For you, for her, because it certainly hasn't been easier for me. Valentina had been quiet during this exchange, but now she spoke up with the calculating tone of someone working an angle. Look, clearly there have been some misunderstandings, some hurt feelings, but we're family, and family works through these things, right? I stared at her, marveling at the speed with which she had pivoted from treating me like a servant to claiming family solidarity. Are we family, Valentina? Because yesterday you told the hotel staff that I wasn't part of your group. I was just, I was confused. I didn't understand the situation. What situation? That I'm Jay's mother, that I'm your children's grandmother. What exactly confused you about that? She had the grace to look slightly ashamed, but not enough to actually apologize. I just meant that you seemed, I thought you thought I was poor, I finished for her. You thought I was some pathetic old woman that Jay was stuck supporting out of obligation, and that made it okay to treat me like garbage. That's not. I wouldn't. You would. You did. And the only thing that's changed is that you've learned I have money. Suddenly I'm family again. Suddenly I matter. Suddenly you want to work through our misunderstandings. The truth of it hung between us like a toxic cloud. Valentina's face had flushed red, but she couldn't deny what we both knew to be true. Money changes everything, doesn't it? I continued. When you thought I was poor, I was an embarrassment to be hidden away. Now that you know I'm rich, I'm family to be embraced. The person hasn't changed, Valentina, just your perception of my worth. That's not fair, she said, but there was no conviction in her voice. Fair. I laughed, and it came out bitter and sharp. You want to talk about fair? Let me tell you what's not fair. What's not fair is working 18-hour days for decades to build something magnificent, only to have your own family treat you like you're worthless. What's not fair is giving everything you have to people who can't even be bothered to say thank you. What's not fair is being made to feel ashamed of your own success because it makes other people uncomfortable. The room had fallen completely silent except for the sound of the ocean through the open balcony doors. Even the children seemed to understand that something momentous was happening, something that would change their family forever. So what happens now? Jay asked finally. It was a good question. What did happen now? I had spent so many years enabling their behavior, making excuses for their treatment of me, telling myself that family was more important than dignity. But somewhere between yesterday's humiliation and this morning's confrontation, I had reached a breaking point. Now, I said slowly, things are going to be different. Different how? Valentina asked, and I could hear the fear creeping back into her voice. That depends on you, I said. It depends on whether you want to be a real family or just people who share DNA and a bank account. The weight of my words seemed to press down on the room like a heavy blanket. Valentina and Jay exchanged glances, and I could practically see the gears turning in their heads as they tried to figure out how to navigate this new reality. The children sat frozen on the couch, their eyes darting between the adults like spectators at a tennis match they didn't quite understand. What do you mean different? Jay asked carefully, as if he were defusing a bomb. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked out at the resort sprawling below us. Guests were already making their way to the pools and beaches, families laughing together as they started their day in paradise. My paradise. The empire I had built stone by stone, sacrifice by sacrifice. I mean that if we're going to be a family, we're going to act like one, I said without turning around. Real families don't have servants who happen to share their DNA. Real families don't hide their love behind shame and embarrassment. Real families certainly don't lie to each other for a decade about something as basic as how they make a living. When I turned back to face them, Valentina was chewing her bottom lip, a nervous habit I had noticed she had when she was calculating her next move. Jay looked like he was caught between panic and resignation. Okay, Valentina said slowly. So what would being a real family look like to you? The question surprised me. I had expected more arguments, more deflection, more of the dismissive attitude that had characterized every interaction we'd had for years. Instead, she seemed genuinely interested in finding a solution, though I suspected her motivations had everything to do with protecting her access to my wealth. It would look like respect, I said. It would look like inclusion. It would look like honesty. We can do that, Jay said quickly, too quickly. We can definitely do that. Can you? I asked. Because yesterday you watched your wife tell a room full of strangers that I was hired help, and you said nothing. Yesterday you made me carry your luggage like a porter while you strutted around pretending to be a successful businessman. Yesterday your children spoke to me like I was a servant, because that's what you've taught them I am. Jay's face reddened. I never taught them that. You didn't have to, I said. Children learn what they live. They learn by watching how their parents treat people. They learn by observing what behavior gets rewarded and what gets ignored. Emma, who had been quietly absorbing this adult conversation with the intensity that only children possess, suddenly spoke up. Is that why you looked so sad yesterday, Grandma Renee? The question hit me like a physical blow. I had thought I was hiding my pain so well, putting on the brave face I had perfected over decades of business negotiations and difficult decisions. But this 10-year-old had seen right through my facade to the hurt underneath. Yes, sweetheart, I said softly, that's exactly why. I'm sorry, Emma said, and the simple sincerity in her voice almost brought me to tears. I didn't know. Mom said you were just. I thought you were supposed to help us. Valentina's face went pale. Emma, don't. No, I said firmly. Let her talk. Let her tell the truth. Emma looked between her parents and me, clearly torn between loyalty and honesty. Mom said you weren't really important, that you just liked to pretend you were part of the family, but you weren't really. She said we had to be nice to you because Daddy felt sorry for you. The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel my heart breaking and reforming at the same time, shattering into pieces and then crystallizing into something harder, more determined. Emma, Valentina hissed, you weren't supposed to. Supposed to what? I asked, my voice deadly quiet. Supposed to repeat what you told her. Supposed to tell the truth about how you really feel about me. Valentina's mouth opened and closed several times before she managed to speak. That's not. I was just trying to. The situation was complicated. The situation was simple, I corrected. I'm Jay's mother. I'm their grandmother. I love this family more than my own life, but you couldn't bear the thought that your children might actually care about someone you considered beneath you. Marcus, who had been even quieter than his sister, suddenly piped up with the brutal honesty that 8-year-olds are famous for. Are you really rich, Grandma Renee? Marcus, Jay warned. It's okay, I said. Yes, Marcus, I am. Like really, really rich, like more money than we could spend. I couldn't help but smile at his earnestness. Something like that. So we don't have to worry about money anymore. And there it was, the question that cut to the heart of everything. This child had been living with anxiety about financial security because his parents had built their entire lives on lies and pretense. He had worried about money because deep down some part of him had sensed that their lifestyle was built on shaky ground. You never had to worry about money, I told him gently. I've been taking care of your family for a long time. But Mom said, what did Mom say? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Marcus looked at his mother nervously, then back at me. She said that Daddy worked really hard to give us nice things and that we had to be grateful and not ask for too much because money doesn't grow on trees. I felt something cold and hard settle in my stomach. Valentina had been using the fear of poverty to control the children, making them feel guilty for wanting things while simultaneously living a life of absolute luxury funded entirely by my money. Marcus, I said carefully, have you ever worried that your family might not have enough money? He nodded solemnly. Sometimes, especially when Mom and Dad whisper about bills and stuff. Mom says we have to be careful. I turned to look at Valentina, who had gone very pale. Careful about what exactly? The $50,000 that appears in your account every month like clockwork. The credit cards I pay off without question, the mortgage, I covered the car payments, the private school tuition. You don't understand, Valentina said desperately. Children need structure. They need to understand the value of money. They need to understand the value of honesty, I shot back. They need to know that their security doesn't depend on their father's imaginary job or their mother's careful budgeting. They need to know that their grandmother loves them enough to ensure they'll never want for anything. Jay had been unusually quiet during this exchange, but now he spoke up with something that sounded almost like anger. So, what you want us to raise entitled brats who think money just magically appears, as opposed to raising children who live in fear while their parents live in luxury? I asked. As opposed to teaching them to treat their grandmother like a servant while they enjoy the benefits of her generosity. That's not what we were doing, he protested, but the words lacked conviction. Isn't it Jay, your son just told me he worries about money while living in a house I bought, wearing clothes I paid for, attending a school I fund? Your daughter has been taught that I'm not really family, just some pathetic old woman her father feels obligated to tolerate. What would you call that? The truth hung between us like a toxic cloud. I could see Jay struggling with it, part of him recognizing the validity of my accusations, part of him defensive about his role as a parent and husband. We were trying to protect them, he said finally, and from what? From knowing they're loved, from feeling secure, from understanding that their grandmother would move heaven and earth to ensure their happiness. Valentina suddenly stood up, pacing to the window with agitated steps. This is all very touching, she said, her voice tight with barely controlled emotion. But let's be practical here. What exactly do you want from us? The bluntness of the question was almost refreshing. At least she was dropping the pretense of caring about family harmony and getting straight to the point. I want to be treated like a human being, I said simply. I want to be included in family decisions that affect me. I want my grandchildren to know who I really am, and I want the lying to stop. What lying, she asked, though we both knew exactly what I meant. The lying about Jay's job, the lying about where your money comes from, the lying about my role in this family, all of it. Jay looked panicked. Mom, you can't expect us to tell people that I don't work. Do you know what that would do to our reputation, our standing in the community? Your reputation. I stared at him in disbelief. Your reputation is built on money I provide and success you haven't earned. What exactly are you so afraid of losing? Everything he said simply, and for the first time in this entire conversation, I heard genuine emotion in his voice. Our friends, our social circle, our children's place at school. Do you think people will want to associate with us if they know I'm a kept man, living off mommy's money? The words kept man hung in the air between us, and I could see how much they cost him to say. For all his faults, for all his lies and selfishness, Jay was still a man with pride, and that pride was being systematically destroyed by the truth of his situation. So what's the alternative? I asked. Keep lying forever. Keep pretending I'm nothing while you take credit for my life's work. Keep teaching your children that love comes with conditions and family relationships are based on shame. Valentina had been listening to this exchange with growing frustration, and now she exploded. This is ridiculous. You're talking about destroying our entire life because your feelings got hurt. My feelings got hurt. I turned to face her fully, and I could feel something dangerous stirring in my chest. Valentina, let me tell you what happened to my feelings. My feelings were crushed when you told a room full of strangers not to speak to me because I was just the help. My feelings were devastated when my own grandchildren looked at me like I was a servant. My feelings were obliterated when I realized that the family I had sacrificed everything for saw me as nothing more than an embarrassing inconvenience. We don't see you that way, Jay protested, but his voice was weak. Don't you? Then explain yesterday to me. Explain why I spent the day alone in this suite while you enjoyed the amenities I paid for. Explain why your wife felt comfortable treating me like hired help in my own hotel. Explain why your children have been taught that I'm not really important. The silence stretched between us, heavy with the weight of unspoken truths and unacknowledged wounds. I could see them all processing what I was saying, trying to find a way to justify or explain away behavior that was fundamentally inexcusable. Finally, Emma's small voice cut through the tension. Grandma Renee, do you still love us? The question broke my heart. This child who had been poisoned against me by her parents' lies and manipulations was still young enough to hope for love, still innocent enough to believe in the possibility of redemption. I love you more than you'll ever know, I told her, my voice thick with emotion. I love all of you. That's why this hurts so much. Then why are we fighting? Marcus asked with the simple logic of childhood. Because sometimes people who love each other have to fight to save their relationship, I explained. Sometimes you have to break things that are broken so you can build them better. Valentina had been quiet during this exchange, but now she spoke up with the calculating tone that I had learned to dread. So what would building it better look like? Specifically, well, I could see her mind working, trying to figure out how to manage this situation to her advantage. She wanted to know what concessions she would have to make, what performance she would have to put on to maintain her access to my money. It would look like honesty, I said. Complete honesty. No more lies about Jay's job or where your money comes from. Jay looked like he might be sick. Mom, you can't ask us to do that. It would be social suicide. Would it? Or would it be the first step toward building something real instead of something built on lies? But what would we tell people? Valentina asked. What would we say when they ask about Jay's work? You could tell them the truth, that Jay is taking time to figure out his next career move while helping me manage my business interests. It was a generous interpretation of the facts, and we all knew it. Jay wasn't helping me manage anything. He barely knew what I did for a living. But it was a face-saving version of the truth that might allow him to maintain some dignity while acknowledging reality. That could work, Jay said slowly, and I could see him testing the story in his mind. I could say I'm consulting with you on hospitality investments. You could, I agreed, if that's what you actually want to do. He looked confused. What do you mean? I mean that if you want to be involved in the business, really involved, then we can make that happen. But it would mean learning the industry, understanding how these properties operate, taking on real responsibilities. The offer hung in the air between us. I was giving him a chance to transform his lie into reality, to become the successful businessman he had been pretending to be. But it would require work commitment and the willingness to start at the bottom despite being 42 years old. I don't know, he said uncertainly. You don't know if you want to work? I asked. I don't know if I'm qualified. I don't know anything about hotels or business or any of that stuff. Shunt. It was the first honest thing he had said in years, and I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe there was still a chance to salvage something from this wreckage. You could learn, I said, if you wanted to, if you were willing to put in the effort. Valentina had been listening to this exchange with growing alarm. Wait, are you saying Jay would have to actually work, like a real job with hours and responsibilities? I'm saying that if he wants to be part of the business, he needs to contribute to the business. That's how it works. But what about our lifestyle? What about the flexibility we have now? And there it was, the real concern, not Jay's personal fulfillment or professional development, but the impact on their comfortable existence as people of leisure. What about it? I asked. Well, if Jay has to work regular hours, who's going to handle the social obligations, the charity events, the school functions? I stared at her in amazement. Valentina, normal working people manage to handle social obligations and school functions. Somehow they figure it out. But we're not normal working people, she protested. We have a certain position in the community, expectations. Expectations based on money I provide and success Jay hasn't earned, I pointed out. Maybe it's time to build some expectations based on actual accomplishments. The conversation was spiraling into territory that clearly made both of them uncomfortable. They had lived for so long in their bubble of unearned privilege that the idea of actually working for their lifestyle was almost incomprehensible. Look, Jay said finally, maybe we can find some middle ground here, some way to make everyone happy. What did you have in mind? I asked, though I suspected I already knew. Well, maybe I could have some kind of consulting arrangement with your company, something that gives me a legitimate title and role without requiring me to completely change our lifestyle. A consulting arrangement, a fake job with a real paycheck dressed up to look like legitimate employment. It was exactly the kind of half measure I had come to expect from him, the appearance of change without any actual transformation. Jay, I said quietly, do you hear yourself right now? What do you mean? You're sitting in a hotel suite that costs more per night than most people make in a month, talking about how to maintain a lifestyle you've never worked a day to earn, while your wife calculates how little actual effort she can get away with putting into treating me like family. Do you hear how that sounds? His face flushed red. It's not like that. Isn't it? You just asked me to create a fake job for you so you can keep pretending to be something you're not. How is that different from what you've been doing all along? Valentina stepped forward, her voice sharp with frustration. What do you want from us? Do you want Jay to throw away 10 years of building our reputation and start over as some kind of entry-level hotel employee? Do you want our children to be embarrassed by their father's sudden career change? Do you want to destroy everything we've built? Everything you've built, I repeated slowly. Valentina, what exactly have you built? What have either of you actually created or accomplished or contributed to the world? The question hung in the air like an accusation. I could see them both struggling to come up with an answer, some evidence of their value beyond their ability to spend my money and maintain social appearances. We've raised two beautiful children, Valentina said finally. Have you raised two children who think their grandmother is a servant? Two children who worry about money while living in luxury? Two children who are learning that love is conditional and family relationships are based on what people can do for you? Emma had been listening to this entire exchange with the focused attention of a child trying to understand the adult world, and now she spoke up with devastating clarity. Are you saying that Daddy doesn't really work? The question fell into the room like a stone into still water, creating ripples that touched every corner of our broken family dynamic. Jay looked at his daughter, this innocent child who was watching her father's carefully constructed identity crumble in real time. Emma, it's complicated. It's not complicated, I said gently. Your daddy doesn't have a job like other daddies do. He gets money from me so your family can have nice things. So you take care of us? Emma asked. I do. Like how mommies and daddies take care of their children. The parallel was so perfect, so cutting that I almost gasped. This 10-year-old had grasped something that had taken me years to fully understand. I wasn't just Jay's mother anymore. I was supporting him the way a parent supports a child, while he and his family treated me with the casual dismissal that children often show their caregivers. Something like that, I said. Emma nodded thoughtfully. So when we were mean to you yesterday, it was like being mean to someone who was taking care of us. Emma, stop, Valentina said sharply. You don't understand the situation. I think I understand it better than you want me to, Emma replied with the brutal honesty that only children possess. Marcus, not to be outdone by his sister's insight, added his own observation. If Grandma Renee takes care of us, why did you tell us she wasn't important? The question hit Valentina like a physical blow. I watched her face cycle through emotions, shame, anger, defensiveness, and finally something that looked almost like panic. I never said she wasn't important, she protested weakly. Yes, you did, Emma said matter-of-factly. You said she was just pretending to be family and that we had to be nice to her because Daddy felt sorry for her. And you said she was poor, and that's why she dressed funny, Marcus added helpfully. I felt something break open in my chest, not pain this time, but something cleaner and sharper. These children, despite their parents' efforts to poison them against me, were still capable of seeing truth and recognizing injustice. They were still young enough to value fairness over social convenience. You told them I was poor. I asked Valentina quietly. She had the grace to look ashamed, but not enough to actually apologize. I was trying to explain why your lifestyle was different from ours. My lifestyle is different because I choose to spend my money on other people instead of designer clothes and expensive cars, I said. I dress simply because I value substance over appearance. I live modestly because I've learned that happiness doesn't come from material possessions. But it helps, Valentina muttered, and despite everything, I almost smiled at her honesty. It can, I agreed, but only when it's shared with people who appreciate it, only when it's part of genuine relationships built on love and respect. Jay had been unusually quiet during this exchange, and when he finally spoke, his voice was small and uncertain. Mom, what do you want us to do? How do we fix this? It was the first time in years that he had asked me for guidance, the first time he had acknowledged that I might have wisdom worth hearing. The question gave me a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could still salvage something from the wreckage of our family. I want you to decide what kind of people you want to be, I said. I want you to look at your children and ask yourself what you're teaching them about love, about family, about the value of human beings. We love our children, Valentina said defensively. I know you do. But what are you teaching them about how love works? Are you teaching them that people are valuable because of what they can provide? Are you teaching them that family relationships are based on mutual benefit rather than unconditional affection? The questions hung in the air heavy with implications. I could see both of them struggling with the answers, confronting truths they had been avoiding for years. We want to do better, Jay said finally, that we want to be better, but I don't know how. It was the most honest thing he had said since this conversation began, and it gave me more hope than anything else that had happened in the last 2 days. We start by telling the truth, I said, to each other, to the children, to ourselves. We stop pretending that what we have is working and start building something real. But what about our reputation? What about our friends? What about the children's social standing at school? Valentina's voice was plaintive, almost desperate. What about them, Sa? I asked. Are those relationships worth more than your integrity? Are they worth more than your children's emotional health? Are they worth more than having a real family instead of a performance? The silence that followed was different from the tense quiet that had characterized most of our conversation. This was the silence of people thinking of minds grappling with difficult truths and uncomfortable possibilities. Finally, Emma spoke up with the clarity that sometimes comes from innocence. I think I'd rather have a grandmother who loves me than friends who only like me because we have fancy things. Her words cut through all the adult complications and calculations, reducing our entire situation to its essential truth. Love or appearance, authenticity or performance, family or social status. The choice when a 10-year-old laid it out seemed remarkably simple. But as I looked at the adults in the room, my son and daughter-in-law who had built their entire identities around lies and material success, I realized that simple and easy were two very different things. The question was whether they were brave enough to choose love over appearance, truth over comfort, authentic relationship over carefully maintained pretense. I was about to find out. Emma's words hung in the air like a challenge, and I watched as they landed on her parents with the force of absolute truth. The silence that followed was pregnant with possibility, the kind of moment when everything can change, when people have to choose between who they've been and who they could become. But before anyone could respond, there was a soft knock at the suite door. "Room service," called a familiar voice from the hallway. I felt my pulse quicken. I hadn't ordered anything, and neither had my family as far as I knew. Jay went to answer the door, and I heard him exchange pleasantries with someone before returning with a confused expression. "It's for you, Mom," he said, holding out an elegant silver envelope. The woman said it was urgent. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the envelope, recognizing the distinctive letterhead of my own company. Inside was a brief note from Jasmine. "Mrs. Carter, we need to discuss the Bahamas property situation immediately. I'm in the lobby. JT, the Bahamas property situation. Those 4 words sent a chill down my spine because I knew exactly what they meant. 3 months ago, I had discovered that one of my resort managers had been embezzling funds, and the legal ramifications were still unfolding. If Jasmine was here in person instead of calling, something had gone very wrong. I need to step out for a few minutes, I said, folding the note carefully. Now, Valentina's voice was sharp with frustration. In the middle of our conversation, some things can't wait, I replied, moving toward the door. But we were just getting somewhere, Jay protested. We were starting to work things out. I paused at the door, looking back at my family, my son, who was finally showing some vulnerability, my daughter-in-law, who was beginning to grasp the consequences of her actions, my grandchildren, who were seeing their parents' pretenses crumble in real time. We'll finish this conversation, I promised. But first, I have to handle some business, real business. I saw Jay flinch at the emphasis on real, but I was already out the door, my mind shifting into the mode I knew best, the focused, analytical thinking that had built an empire and solved countless crises over 4 decades. The elevator ride down to the lobby felt interminable. I found myself studying my reflection in the polished brass doors, seeing not the dismissed grandmother from yesterday morning, but the woman I had always been underneath R.C. Carter, CEO of Coastal Paradise Resorts, a woman who commanded respect from presidents and prime ministers, who had been featured on the covers of business magazines, who had built something extraordinary from nothing. Jasmine was waiting near the concierge desk, her usually perfect composure showing cracks of stress. At 38, she was one of the most competent people I had ever worked with, a Harvard MBA who could have run any company she chose, but who had chosen to work with me because she believed in what we were building together. Seeing her rattled was more alarming than any financial report could have been. Mrs. Carter, she said, relief evident in her voice as she spotted me. Thank God you're here. What's the situation? I asked, falling into step beside her as she led me toward a quiet corner of the lobby. Marshall Henderson called an emergency board meeting, she said, her voice low but urgent. He's challenging your authority, claiming you're no longer competent to run the company. Marshall Henderson. The name hit me like a physical blow. My business partner for the last 15 years, the man I had trusted to help expand the company internationally, the person who had been privy to almost every major decision I had made. If Marshall was moving against me, it meant the situation was more serious than I had imagined. On what grounds, I asked, though I suspected I already knew. He's claiming that your recent behavior has been erratic and concerning. He says you've been making emotional decisions that could jeopardize the company's financial stability. Recent behavior. Emotional decisions. I felt a bitter laugh rise in my throat. The only emotional decision I had made lately was trying to have a relationship with my family, and even that had taken place entirely in private, unless— Jasmine, I said slowly, how does Marshall know anything about my recent behavior? I haven't spoken to him in 2 weeks. Her face went pale. I was afraid you'd ask that. Tell me. He says he has sources close to you, people who are concerned about your judgment and your ability to separate personal issues from business responsibilities. Sources close to me. There weren't many people who qualified for that description. My household staff were all loyal employees who had been with me for years. My business associates respected professional boundaries. The only people who had intimate knowledge of my personal life were my family. I whispered, the realization hitting me like ice water. Jasmine nodded grimly. I'm sorry, Mrs. Carter. I think Jay might have been talking to Marshall. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating that for a moment I couldn't breathe. My own son, the person I had supported financially and emotionally for his entire adult life, had apparently decided to ally himself with someone who was trying to steal my company. How long? I managed to ask. I don't know for certain, but Marshall has been asking questions about your personal finances, your family relationships, your state of mind. He seems to know things that only someone very close to you would know. I felt the world tilt beneath my feet. Everything made sense now. Jay's sudden interest in bringing me on this family vacation, his insistence that we spend time together, his questions about the business over the past few months that I had interpreted as genuine interest in my work. He hadn't been trying to reconnect with his mother. He had been gathering intelligence for Marshall Henderson. "Where's the board meeting?" I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Conference Room A at the Miami headquarters. It started 20 minutes ago." 20 minutes ago, while I was upstairs having what I thought was a breakthrough conversation with my family, the people I trusted most in the world were systematically betraying me. The irony was so bitter I could taste it. "Call my driver, Bub," I said. "I'll be at headquarters in 30 minutes. "Mrs. Carter, are you sure maybe we should consult with legal first? Maybe we should—" "Jasmine." My voice carried the authority of 4 decades in business, the tone that had closed billion-dollar deals and faced down hostile takeovers. "Call my driver." She nodded and pulled out her phone, but I could see the concern in her eyes. She was wondering the same thing Marshall Henderson was probably wondering, whether R.C. Carter was still the formidable businesswoman she had always been, or whether personal troubles had finally compromised her judgment. As I waited for the car, I found myself thinking about the conversation I had just left upstairs. Emma's innocent words about preferring love to fancy things, Jay's admission that he didn't know how to be better, Valentina's desperate calculations about maintaining their lifestyle. All of it had been a performance. All of it had been manipulation designed to keep me distracted while Marshall Henderson moved to steal everything I had built. The realization should have broken me. Instead, I felt something cold and hard crystallizing in my chest. I had built coastal paradise resorts by being smarter, tougher, and more determined than everyone who had tried to stop me. I had survived poverty, sexism, economic downturns, and countless attempts to discredit or diminish me. I was not going to lose my empire to Marshall Henderson, and certainly not because my own son had sold me out for whatever promises had been made to him. The ride to headquarters took exactly 28 minutes through Miami traffic that would have challenged a NASCAR driver. I used every second of that time to think, to plan, to prepare for what was undoubtedly going to be the fight of my professional life. When I walked into the Coastal Paradise Resort's headquarters, I felt like I was coming home. The sleek lobby with its marble floors and tropical plantings, the subtle scent of ocean breeze from the custom aromatherapy system, the quiet efficiency of employees who took pride in their work, all of it was mine. All of it represented decades of vision sacrifice and relentless determination. The elevator to the executive floor seemed to rise more slowly than usual, giving me time to center myself, to remember who I was and what I had accomplished. By the time the doors opened, I was no longer the hurt grandmother from the hotel suite. I was R.C. Carter, and I was about to remind everyone why that name commanded respect. Conference Room A was buzzing with tense conversation when I walked in. The 12 board members were seated around the polished mahogany table, with Marshall Henderson holding court at the far end. He was a distinguished man in his early 60s, with silver hair and the kind of expensive suit that whispered rather than shouted about wealth. We had been partners for 15 years, and I had trusted him with my most sensitive business decisions. The conversation stopped abruptly when I entered the room. "Renee," Marshall said, his voice carefully neutral, "I wasn't sure you'd be able to join us." "Wouldn't miss it," I replied, taking my seat at the head of the table, the seat that was mine by right, by achievement, by the simple fact that I owned 60% of this company. I looked around the table at faces I had known for years, some supportive, some uncertain, some clearly uncomfortable with whatever Marshall had been telling them. These were people I had worked with, trusted, built relationships with over decades. The fact that they were sitting here listening to challenges to my authority was its own kind of betrayal. Marshall was just explaining his concerns about the company's direction, said Patricia Winters, the head of our legal department and one of the few people in the room I was certain I could count on. Were you? I asked pleasantly. What concerns might those be? Marshall cleared his throat, clearly having expected to have more time to build his case before I arrived. Renee, I think we all know that you've been under considerable personal stress lately. There have been some concerning reports about your judgment, your decision-making process. What reports? I asked, my voice still conversational. Well, there have been indications that you've been making emotional rather than rational business decisions, that personal issues are affecting your ability to lead the company effectively. I leaned back in my chair, studying his face. Marshall had always been good at corporate politics, at making reasonable sounding arguments that served his own interests. But he had made one crucial mistake. He had underestimated me. Personal issues, I repeated. What personal issues might those be, Marshall? I understand there have been some family difficulties, some financial decisions that perhaps weren't entirely sound, some concerning behavior. The vagueness of his accusations told me everything I needed to know. He was fishing, hoping I would provide him with ammunition by defending myself against charges he couldn't actually substantiate. I see, I said. And where did you hear about these alleged personal issues? Marshall's eyes flickered almost imperceptibly toward the door, and I knew with absolute certainty that Jay was somewhere in the building, probably waiting to be called in as a witness to my supposed incompetence. I have sources, Marshall said carefully, people who care about you and about the company. People who care about me. I let the phrase hang in the air for a moment. How thoughtful. And what exactly have these caring sources told you that you've been displaying signs of age-related cognitive decline, that you've been making erratic financial decisions, that you may not be competent to continue running this company? The accusations hung in the air like poison gas, and I could see some of the board members shifting uncomfortably. Age-related cognitive decline was a particularly clever attack, difficult to disprove and devastating to a CEO's credibility. I see, I said again. Well, that's quite serious. I suppose you have documentation to support these claims. Marshall's confidence flickered for just a moment. I have testimony from reliable sources. Testimony, how interesting. And I suppose you're prepared to produce these reliable sources so the board can evaluate their credibility. If necessary, yes. I nodded slowly as if considering his response. Marshall, in your opinion, what would constitute the most damaging example of my alleged cognitive decline? He leaned forward, sensing an opportunity. Well, for example, I understand you've been giving away substantial sums of money without proper documentation or oversight. $50,000 a month to family members with no business justification, no contracts, no accountability measures. There it was. The information that could only have come from Jay. My own son had not only betrayed the family secrets to Marshall, but had framed my generosity to him as evidence of mental incompetence. 50,000 a month, I repeated thoughtfully. That does sound like a lot of money. It is a lot of money, Marshall pressed. Money that belongs to the shareholders being distributed based on emotional impulses rather than sound business principles. Emotional impulses, I mused. Marshall, can you tell me what $50,000 represents as a percentage of Coastal Paradise Resort's monthly revenue? He blinked clearly, not expecting the question. That's not really the point. Humor me. Our monthly revenue is approximately $42 million. What percentage would 50,000 represent? I could see him calculating, realizing where this was going. About 1/10 of 1%. 1/10 of 1%, I confirmed. So even if your allegations about my financial decision-making were true, we'd be talking about a sum that represents less than the cost of replacing the lobby furniture in our smallest property. The board members were paying attention now, following the mathematics and beginning to understand the scope of what Marshall was calling a crisis. But it's not just the amount, Marshall said, scrambling to regain his footing. It's the principle. It's the lack of oversight, the emotional decision making, the blurring of personal and professional boundaries. The blurring of personal and professional boundaries, I repeated. That's an interesting phrase coming from someone who apparently recruited my own family members to spy on me. The silence in the room was deafening. I could see the shock on several faces, the discomfort on others. This was not the direction Marshall had intended the conversation to take. I don't know what you're implying, he said, but his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. I'm not implying anything, Marshall. I'm stating directly that someone very close to me has been feeding you information about my personal life, my family relationships, and my private financial decisions. Information that you're now trying to use to question my competence. Patricia Winters leaned forward, her legal instincts clearly engaged. Marshall, is this true? Do you have sources inside Mrs. Carter's family? I have people who are concerned about Renee's welfare, Marshall said defensively, people who want to protect her from making decisions she might regret. People who want to protect me, I said, unable to keep the bitter edge from my voice. How thoughtful. And what do these protective people hope to gain from their concern? This isn't about personal gain. This is about the future of the company. The future of the company, I agreed. My company. The company I built from a single rundown motel 36 years ago. The company that has grown into a nearly billion-dollar enterprise under my leadership. The company that has never had a single unprofitable year, never missed a dividend payment, never failed to exceed growth projections. I stood up, feeling the full weight of my authority settle around me like a familiar cloak. Marshall let me make something very clear to everyone in this room. Coastal Paradise Resorts belongs to me. I own 60% of this company outright. I built every property hired, every key employee made, every major decision that brought us to where we are today. The board members were listening intently now, remembering who was actually in charge of this room. You want to talk about cognitive decline, I continued. Let's talk about the Bahamas expansion you advocated for last year, the one I opposed because the environmental impact studies were incomplete, the one that would have cost us $40 million in lawsuits and regulatory fines if we had proceeded. Marshall's face was getting red. That was a difference of opinion. Let's talk about the technology upgrade you pushed for the one I delayed because I knew the vendor was having financial difficulties, the one that would have left us with unusable software and no support when they declared bankruptcy 6 months later. I could see several board members nodding, remembering these decisions and others like them. Let's talk about the staffing cuts you recommended during the pandemic, the ones I rejected because I knew our employees were our most valuable asset, the ones that would have devastated morale and customer service while our competitors were laying off thousands. Each example hit home, reminding everyone in the room why Coastal Paradise Resorts had not only survived, but thrived while other hospitality companies struggled. Marshall, in the 15 years we've worked together, can you point to a single major decision where your judgment proved superior to mine? A single instance where you were right and I was wrong about something that mattered? The silence stretched uncomfortably. Marshall was a competent businessman, but he had never been the visionary, never been the one who saw around corners or anticipated market shifts. He had been an excellent operations manager, but he had never been a leader. This isn't about past decisions, he said finally. This is about your current state of mind. My current state of mind, I repeated. Marshall, yesterday I walked through every property we own in South Florida, reviewing operations, meeting with staff, examining financial reports. I identified 3 areas for improvement, 2 opportunities for expansion, and 1 potential problem with our supply chain. This morning, before coming here, I reviewed the quarterly reports from our Caribbean properties and approved a $15 million renovation project in Barbados. I turned to address the full board. Does any of that sound like the behavior of someone suffering from cognitive decline? No one is questioning your day-to-day operational abilities, Marshall said desperately. But there are concerns about your emotional stability, your family situation, my family situation. I felt something cold and dangerous settle in my voice. Marshall, I want you to be very careful about what you say next. Because my family situation is none of your business, none of this board's business, and certainly not relevant to my ability to run this company. But when family issues start affecting business decisions, what family issues? What business decisions? Be specific, Marshall. Give me concrete examples of how my personal life has negatively impacted this company. He opened his mouth and closed it, realizing he had walked into a trap. Any specific examples he provided would reveal how he had obtained his information, exposing Jay's betrayal and his own manipulation of family relationships for business advantage. There have been reports. Reports from whom? About what, Marshall? Either you have evidence of actual misconduct or incompetence, or you're conducting a character assassination based on gossip and family dysfunction. Which is it? The room was completely silent now. I could see the board members processing what they were hearing, understanding that Marshall had brought them here under false pretenses, that his case against me was built on manipulation and hearsay rather than legitimate business concerns. Patricia Winters finally spoke up. Marshall, I think we need to see some documentation. If you're asking this board to remove Mrs. Carter from her position, you need to provide concrete evidence of misconduct or incompetence, not rumors, not family gossip, evidence. The evidence is her own admission, so Marshall said desperately. She just confirmed that she's been giving away $50,000 a month to family members. She confirmed that she's been supporting her family, Patricia corrected, which is her absolute right as both the majority owner of this company and as a private individual. Unless you can show that this has harmed the company's performance, it's irrelevant. I could see Marshall's confidence cracking completely now. He had expected me to be defensive, emotional, vulnerable. Instead, I had turned his attack back on him, exposing the weakness of his position and the questionable nature of his methods. There's something else you should all know, I said quietly. Marshall, you mentioned that you have sources close to me, people who are concerned about my welfare. Would you like to tell the board about the promises you made to those sources, about what they were told they might gain from their cooperation? The color drained from Marshall's face. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? Because I think my family was promised something in exchange for their information, something about future security, about protection for their financial interests, something that would ensure their lifestyle remained intact even if I were no longer running the company. It was a guess, but an educated one based on 30 years of reading people and understanding motivations. The look on Marshall's face told me I had hit the target. That's not because if you promised my family members that they would be better off financially if you replaced me as CEO, that would constitute fraud, wouldn't it, Patricia? Patricia Winters was taking notes now, her legal mind clearly engaged. It would certainly raise serious ethical questions, and potentially legal ones. I could see panic flickering in Marshall's eyes now. What had seemed like a clever manipulation of family dysfunction was suddenly looking like conspiracy and fraud. I think, I said calmly, that this board meeting is over. Marshall made one last desperate play. Renee, even if you survive this challenge, the damage is done. Your own family has lost confidence in you. Your son believes you're no longer competent. How can you lead a company when your own family has turned against you? The words were designed to hurt, to remind me of the betrayal that was still raw and bleeding in my chest. But instead of weakening me, they crystallized something that had been building since the moment Jasmine had told me about Jay's treachery. Marshall, I said, my voice carrying the full weight of 4 decades of business experience, you've just made your biggest mistake. I turned to address the full board, feeling more powerful and more certain than I had in years. I want to be very clear about something. My family's loyalty or lack thereof has no bearing on my ability to run this company. I built Coastal Paradise Resorts before my son was old enough to understand what a business was, and I'll be running it long after he's forgotten whatever promises he was made. The board members were hanging on every word now, sensing that something significant was happening. But Marshall's comment does raise an interesting point about family and business, because while my son may have lost confidence in me, I'm about to demonstrate why that was a critical error in judgment. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number from memory. Security, this is Mrs. Carter. I need you to escort Mr. J. Morrison from the building immediately. He's no longer authorized to be on company property. I could hear Marshall's sharp intake of breath, but I wasn't finished. Jasmine, I need you to freeze all financial accounts associated with J. Morrison effective immediately, and I need you to contact our legal department about pursuing charges against Marshall Henderson for corporate espionage and attempted fraud. I ended the call and looked around the room at faces that ranged from shocked to impressed to deeply uncomfortable. That, I said, is what decisive leadership looks like. That's what happens when someone tries to use my family against me, tries to manipulate my emotions to steal my company, tries to convince me that I'm too old or too weak or too emotionally compromised to protect what I've built. I gathered my papers and stood up, feeling more like myself than I had in months. This meeting is adjourned. Marshall, you have 24 hours to submit your resignation. If you don't, I'll fire you and ensure that every hospitality executive in the country knows exactly why. I walked toward the door, then paused to deliver one final message. And for anyone else who might be wondering whether R.C. Carter still has what it takes to run this company, let me be clear, I'm just getting started. The drive back to the resort felt different than the frantic race to headquarters just 2 hours earlier. Where urgency and betrayal had fueled my earlier journey, this return trip was powered by something else entirely, a crystalline clarity about who I was and what I needed to do. I had spent the last few years of my life trying to be smaller, quieter, less intimidating so my family would feel comfortable around me. I had hidden my success, downplayed my achievements, and pretended to be less than I was because I thought that would make them love me more. What I had actually done was teach them to see me as weak, as someone whose feelings and dignity didn't matter. That ended today. Jasmine had accompanied me back to the resort, her tablet filled with the legal documentation we would need to formalize Jay's expulsion from any future inheritance and Marshall's termination from the company. She sat beside me in the back seat, occasionally glancing at me with something that looked like awe. Mrs. Carter, she said quietly, as we pulled into the resort's circular drive, I've never seen anything like what you just did in that boardroom. What I just did was remember who I am, I replied. Sometimes we get so focused on keeping the peace that we forget how to fight for what matters. As we entered the lobby of my resort, and it felt more mine now than it had in years, I could see the subtle signs of respect from my staff. The way the concierge straightened as I passed, the slight bow from the front desk manager, the genuine smiles from employees who knew exactly who signed their paychecks and appreciated the woman who had built something that gave them meaningful work. This was what I had created. This was what I had sacrificed for. Not just buildings and profits, but an enterprise that employed thousands of people, provided memorable experiences for millions of guests, and stood as a testament to what was possible when vision met determination. Should I wait down here while you handle the family situation? Jasmine asked as we approached the elevators. No, I said firmly. You're coming with me. It's time my family met the woman I really am, not the diminished version of myself I've been presenting. The elevator ride to the penthouse felt like ascending to a final confrontation, and in many ways that's exactly what it was. I was no longer the apologetic grandmother seeking acceptance from her own family. I was R.C. Carter, CEO and majority owner of Coastal Paradise Resorts, and I was about to have a conversation that would determine the future of every relationship that mattered to me. The door to the presidential suite opened before I could knock. Jace stood there, his face pale and his eyes wide with something that looked like panic. Mom, thank God you're back. I need to talk to you. I need to explain. Yes, I said calmly, stepping past him into the suite with Jasmine following behind me. You do. The living area looked exactly as I had left it, but the atmosphere was completely different. Where before there had been the tension of family conflict, now there was the electric charge of consequences about to be delivered. Valentina was pacing by the windows, her phone pressed to her ear, her voice sharp with anxiety. No, I don't know what happened. I don't know why you can't reach him. Something went wrong at his meeting. Emma and Marcus were huddled together on the couch, their young faces reflecting the fear that comes from sensing adult catastrophe brewing around them. Valentina, I said clearly, hang up the phone. She turned toward me, and I could see the exact moment when she noticed Jasmine standing beside me in her crisp business suit, carrying an expensive leather briefcase and wearing the unmistakable air of corporate authority. Who is this? Valentina demanded, but she did end her call. This is Jasmine Torres, my executive assistant, and the person who will be handling the legal aspects of what happens next. Jay's face went even paler. Mom, please let me explain. Marshall said what? I interrupted, my voice carrying the steel I had learned to use in boardrooms around the world. What exactly did Marshall Henderson promise you, Jay? The silence that followed was deafening. I could see Jay's mind racing, trying to figure out how much I knew, how much he could still hide or minimize. I don't know what you think happened, he said finally, but whatever Marshall told you, it's not Xiao Jay. I held up one hand and something in my voice made him stop talking immediately. I know about the phone calls. I know about the information you provided him. I know about the promises he made to you about your financial security if he succeeded in removing me from the company. Valentina's sharp intake of breath told me she hadn't known about Jay's betrayal, which was almost worse than if she had been complicit. It meant Jay had been working behind everyone's back, playing every angle for his own benefit. Marshall tried to have me declared mentally incompetent and removed as CEO of my own company. I continued, my voice steady despite the pain radiating through my chest. He based his case largely on information that could only have come from someone with intimate access to my personal life and financial decisions. Emma's small voice cut through the tension. Daddy, what does that mean? I looked at my granddaughter, this innocent child who was about to learn some very adult truths about loyalty and betrayal, and I made a decision that would shape the rest of our relationship. It means, sweetheart, that your daddy told lies about me to a man who wanted to steal my company. That's not, Jay started, but I continued as if he hadn't spoken. It means that while I was upstairs this morning thinking we were having an honest conversation about being a real family, your daddy was helping someone try to take away everything I've spent 40 years building. Valentina sank into one of the leather chairs, as if her legs could no longer support her. Jay, tell me this isn't true. Tell me you didn't. I was trying to protect our family. Jay exploded, his composure finally cracking completely. Marshall said Mom was losing her grip, that she was making crazy decisions that would destroy the company and leave us with nothing. He said if we didn't intervene, we'd lose everything. When she finally cracked up completely, the words hung in the air like toxic smoke. Even as he was confessing to his betrayal, Jay was still trying to justify it, still trying to make himself the hero of a story where he had sold out his own mother. So you decided to intervene, I said quietly, by providing Marshall with ammunition to use against me. I was trying to save the company. I was trying to save our future. Your future, I corrected. Not mine, not the company's, yours. Jasmine stepped forward slightly, her presence a reminder of the legal implications of what we were discussing. Mrs. Carter, would you like me to explain the consequences of today's actions? I nodded, never taking my eyes off Jay's face. Mr. Morrison, Jasmine said in the crisp professional tone she used for delivering bad news to competitors and adversaries. As of 2 hours ago, you are no longer authorized on any Coastal Paradise Resorts property. Security has been instructed to escort you from the premises if you attempt to enter any of our facilities. Jay's mouth fell open. You can't. This is public accommodation. You can't ban me from hotels. We can and we have, Jasmine continued smoothly. Additionally, all financial support from Mrs. Carter has been terminated immediately. The $50,000 per month, the credit cards, the mortgage payments, the children's school tuition, all of it has been suspended pending a complete review of your actions. Valentina made a sound like a wounded animal. What? You can't just. We have contracts, we have agreements. You have nothing in writing, I said calmly. 10 years of financial support given freely out of love and family obligation. Support that can be withdrawn just as easily as it was provided. The reality was hitting them now, the full scope of what Jay's betrayal had cost them. Emma and Marcus were looking between the adults with growing fear, beginning to understand that their comfortable world was collapsing around them. Furthermore, Jasmine continued, Mr. Morrison's name has been removed from all inheritance documentation. He is no longer a beneficiary of Mrs. Carter's estate. That was the killing blow. I watched my son's face cycle through disbelief, panic, and finally a kind of desperate rage as he grasped what he had lost. You can't do this, he shouted. I'm your son. I'm your only child. You can't just cut me off. I can, and I have. I said, my voice carrying the finality of a judge delivering a verdict. You made your choice, Jay. You chose Marshall Henderson over me. You chose money over family. You chose betrayal over loyalty. Now you get to live with the consequences. Valentina was on her feet now, her face flushed with panic and fury. This is insane. You're destroying your own family over a business dispute. I'm not destroying anything, I replied calmly. I'm simply ending my financial support for people who have demonstrated that they see me as nothing more than a source of money. But we're family, she shrieked. That has to mean something. Family means love, Valentina. Family means respect. Family means loyalty. Family means not conspiring with strangers to destroy the person who has given you everything. I turned to look directly at Jay. Family means not selling out your own mother for promises of future security. Jay seemed to deflate, his rage collapsing into something that looked almost like grief. Mom, I was scared. Marshall said the business was in trouble, that you were making bad decisions that would bankrupt us all. I thought I was protecting everyone. You thought you were protecting yourself, I corrected. You thought you could hedge your bets, play both sides, ensure that you'd be taken care of no matter what happened to me. That's not... I love you, Mom. I've always loved you. The words should have meant something. Part of me wanted them to mean something. But love without respect is just sentiment, and love without loyalty is just manipulation dressed up in pretty words. Love isn't enough, Jay, I said quietly. Love without trust is meaningless. Love without respect is hollow. Love without loyalty is just another word for using people. Emma had been listening to this entire exchange with the wide-eyed attention of a child trying to understand the adult world, and now she spoke up with devastating simplicity. Daddy, why did you lie about Grandma Renee? The question cut through all of Jay's rationalizations and justifications, reducing his betrayal to its essential core. A father lying about his mother to his children and to strangers. I didn't lie, Emma. The situation was complicated. You told Marshall Henderson that I was mentally incompetent, I said, making sure Emma heard every word. You told him that I was making crazy decisions that would destroy the company. You helped him try to convince a room full of people that I was too old and too confused to run my own business. Emma's face crumpled as she processed this information. But that's not true. You're not crazy. You're the smartest person I know. The simple faith in her voice almost broke my heart. This child, despite her parents' attempts to diminish me in her eyes, had seen through to the truth. She had recognized something in me that her own father had chosen to deny. Thank you, sweetheart, I said gently. But your daddy didn't believe that. Your daddy thought I was weak and foolish and incompetent. Marcus, not to be left out of this crucial conversation, added his own observation with 8-year-old logic. If Grandma Renee is weak and foolish, how did she build all those hotels from the mouths of babes? This child had grasped something that his father had failed to understand, that success on the scale I had achieved doesn't come from weakness or foolishness. It comes from strength, intelligence, and the ability to make difficult decisions when they need to be made. That's an excellent question, Marcus, I said. How do you think someone builds 17 luxury resorts? He considered this seriously. By working really hard and being really smart and not giving up. That's exactly right. Jay looked like he was in physical pain. Mom, please. I made a mistake. I was scared and I made a bad decision, but we can fix this. We can work through this. Can we? I asked. Jay, this isn't a mistake. This is a betrayal that took weeks or months to orchestrate. This is a calculated decision to ally yourself with someone who was trying to destroy me. This isn't something you can apologize your way out of. Valentina had been unusually quiet during this exchange, but now she spoke up with the calculating tone I had learned to dread. So what happens now? You just cut us off completely. You destroy your own family to protect your pride. My pride, I repeated slowly. Valentina, this has nothing to do with pride. This has to do with self-respect and boundaries and the simple fact that I will not continue to financially support people who actively work against me. But what about the children? What about Emma and Marcus? Are you going to punish them for their parents' mistakes? It was a clever argument designed to manipulate my love for my grandchildren into continuing the financial support that funded their family's lifestyle. But I had thought about this during the drive back from headquarters, and I knew exactly how I wanted to handle it. The children, I said, turning to look at Emma and Marcus, will always be welcome in my life and my home. They will have trust funds that will ensure their education and their future security, but that support will come directly to them, not through their parents. I could see Valentina calculating the implications of this arrangement: money for the children, but not for the adults, support that couldn't be redirected to maintain their current lifestyle. How are we supposed to live? Jay asked, and the desperation in his voice was almost pathetic. I don't have a job. I don't have any skills. You've made it impossible for me to support my family. I've made it impossible. I stared at him in disbelief. Jay, you're 42 years old. You've had 20 years to develop skills, to build a career, to become someone who contributes something to the world besides spending other people's money. But you never encouraged me to work. You always said the family had enough money that I didn't need to worry about a career. The accusation hit me like a slap, partly because it contained a grain of truth. I had made it too easy for him, had removed every incentive for him to grow and develop and become independent. In my desire to give him security, I had created a man who was incapable of taking care of himself. You're right, I said quietly. I did make it too easy for you. I enabled your dependence instead of encouraging your growth. I gave you everything you wanted instead of helping you become someone who could earn what he needed. The admission seemed to surprise him. He had expected defensiveness, not acknowledgement of my own role in creating the situation. But that ends now, I continued. You're an adult, Jay. You have children who need to see their father as someone who contributes, who works, who builds something meaningful with his life. It's time you learn to do that. I don't know how, he said, and for the first time in this conversation, he sounded genuinely vulnerable instead of manipulative. Then you'll learn, the same way everyone else learns. By trying, failing, getting back up, and trying again. Jasmine cleared her throat softly. Mrs. Carter, there are some additional legal matters we need to discuss. I nodded, knowing what was coming next. The financial consequences were just the beginning. Jay's betrayal had legal implications that went far beyond family drama. Mr. Morrison, Jasmine said, her voice taking on the formal tone she used for serious business, Your actions in providing confidential family financial information to Marshall Henderson may constitute corporate espionage. Depending on what information you shared and how it was used, criminal charges are possible. The color drained from Jay's face. Criminal charges? I didn't commit any crimes. I was just, I was trying to protect my family. You provided confidential information about Mrs. Carter's business decisions, her personal finances, and her mental state to someone who was attempting a hostile takeover of her company, Jasmine explained patiently. That information was used to damage her reputation and potentially steal her business. That's not protection, that's conspiracy to commit fraud. Valentina was looking back and forth between Jasmine and me with growing horror. You're going to have your own son arrested. I'm going to let the legal system determine whether Jay's actions constitute criminal behavior, I corrected. I'm not pressing charges out of spite or revenge. I'm ensuring that there are consequences for betraying the trust of someone who loved you unconditionally. The room fell silent except for the sound of Emma crying quietly. This child was watching her family disintegrate in real time, seeing her father revealed as someone who had betrayed the grandmother she was just beginning to understand and appreciate. I walked over to the couch and sat down beside her, pulling her into my arms. Emma, sweetheart, I know this is scary and confusing. Are you really not going to be our grandma anymore? She asked through her tears. The question broke something open in my chest. I will always be your grandmother. I will always love you and Marcus more than anything in this world. But the way our family works is going to change. Because Daddy lied about you. Because your daddy made some very bad choices that hurt our family. But that doesn't change how much I love you. Marcus had moved closer and I pulled him into the hug as well. What's going to happen to us? You're going to be fine. I promised. You're going to learn that love doesn't depend on money, that family is about more than expensive things, and that your grandmother is someone who will always be there for you no matter what. Jay was watching this interaction with something that looked like anguish. Mom, please, don't punish them for what I did. I'm not punishing them. I'm protecting them. I'm showing them that actions have consequences, that betrayal hurts real people, and that love means more than money. I stood up, still holding both children's hands. Emma, Marcus, your parents need to figure out how they're going to take care of themselves now. But you will always have a place with me. You will always be welcome in my home, at my properties, in my life. Can we come visit you? Emma asked hopefully. Whenever you want. In fact, I was thinking that maybe you'd like to see how hotels really work. Maybe you'd like to learn about the business, see what goes into creating places where families can make happy memories together. The idea clearly excited them, but I could see the conflict in their faces as they looked between me and their parents. It's okay to love us all, I said gently. It's okay to be disappointed in your daddy while still loving him. People are complicated, and families are even more complicated. Valentina had been unusually quiet during this exchange, but now she spoke up with barely controlled desperation. So that's it. You just walk away from 10 years of family. You throw away everything we've built together. What have we built, Valentina? I asked. What exactly have the four of us created together that's worth preserving? She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it, apparently unable to come up with an answer. We've built a relationship based on lies, I continued. We've built a dynamic where I provide money and you provide the illusion of gratitude. We've built a family structure where I'm invisible until you need something, where my accomplishments are minimized, so you can feel comfortable, where my love is taken for granted while my dignity is ignored. The brutal honesty of it hung in the air between us. These were truths that none of us had wanted to acknowledge, realities that had been festering beneath the surface of our family interactions for years. I don't want to build that anymore, I said simply. I want to build something real, or I want to build nothing at all. Jay made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. Mom, what if I worked for the company? What if I really learned the business and contribute something meaningful? What if I prove that I can be the son you deserve? It was what I had wanted to hear for years. Jay expressing genuine interest in the empire I had built, Jay wanting to contribute rather than just consume. But it was too late now, tainted by the circumstances that had brought us to this moment. Jay, I said gently, if you had asked me that question a week ago, a month ago, a year ago, I would have been thrilled. I would have welcomed you into the business with open arms and taught you everything I know. His face lit up with hope. I'm asking now. Now you're asking because you're desperate, because you've burned every other bridge and you need a way to support your family. That's not dedication, that's self-preservation. The hope died in his eyes as he realized I wasn't going to be moved by his last-minute conversion. I need to know that the people I trust with my life's work are there because they believe in what we're doing, not because they need a paycheck, I continued. I need to know that they won't sell me out to competitors when things get difficult. I would never do that again, Jay protested. You said you would never do it the first time, I pointed out. But when Marshall Henderson made you the right offer, promised you the right security, you did it anyway. Jasmine stepped forward with her briefcase. Mrs. Carter, we should finalize the documentation while we're all here. I nodded, knowing this was the moment of no return. Once the papers were signed, the financial support would be legally terminated, the inheritance would be officially revoked, and there would be no going back. Wait, Valentina said desperately. Please just wait. Let's think about this rationally. You're making permanent decisions based on temporary emotions. Temporary emotions, I repeated. Valentina, yesterday you told hotel staff not to speak to me because I was just the help. This morning you told me I wasn't really family. This afternoon your husband tried to have me declared mentally incompetent so he could steal my company. What part of that sounds temporary to you? She had no answer for that because there wasn't one. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment or a family misunderstanding that could be smoothed over with apologies and time. This was a pattern of disrespect and betrayal that had been building for years. I signed the documents that Jasmine placed in front of me, each signature feeling like both an ending and a beginning. With each pen stroke, I was severing ties that had defined my life for the last decade, while simultaneously reclaiming the power and respect that I had given away too freely. It's done, I said, handing the papers back to Jasmine. Jay stared at the signed documents as if he couldn't quite believe what had just happened. Mom, you're really doing this. You're really cutting us off. I'm really choosing myself for once, I corrected. I'm really deciding that my dignity and self-respect are worth more than a family relationship built on lies and exploitation. As if summoned by the gravity of the moment, there was a knock at the suite door. Jasmine went to answer it and returned with a security guard, a professional-looking woman in her 30s who carried herself with quiet authority. Mrs. Carter, the security guard said respectfully, I'm here to escort the Morrison family from the property. The reality of it hit the room like a physical force. This wasn't just an argument or a temporary falling out. This was the end of everything they had known for the last 10 years. You're having us thrown out. Valentina's voice was barely a whisper. I'm having you escorted from property you're no longer welcome on, I corrected. There's a difference. Emma started crying again, and Marcus looked confused and frightened. I knelt down in front of them, my heart breaking for these innocent children who were paying the price for their parents' choices. Listen to me, I said, cupping their faces in my hands. This is not goodbye. This is just different. I love you both more than you'll ever know, and that will never change. When will we see you again? Emma asked through her tears. Soon, I promised. Very soon. And when you do, I'll show you who your grandmother really is. Not the woman your parents wanted you to see, but the woman who built something magnificent so that you would always have everything you needed. I stood up and looked at Jay and Valentina for what I knew would be the last time for a long while. I hope you figure out how to be better people than you've been. I hope you learn how to build something real instead of just taking from others. And I hope someday you understand that what happened today wasn't revenge, it was consequences. Jay looked like he wanted to say something, but no words came. What could he say? What apology could possibly be big enough to bridge the gap he had created? As they gathered their belongings, the expensive luggage they had brought for their luxury vacation, the designer clothes that had been bought with my money, the electronic devices and toys that represented a lifestyle they could no longer afford, I felt something I hadn't expected. Peace. For the first time in years, maybe decades, I felt completely, genuinely at peace. I was no longer trying to be smaller than I was. I was no longer apologizing for my success or hiding my accomplishments. I was no longer begging for scraps of affection from people who saw me as nothing more than a source of funding. I was R.C. Carter again. I was the woman who had built an empire from nothing, who had survived every challenge life had thrown at her, who had never backed down from a fight when something important was at stake. As the security guard escorted my former family from the presidential suite, from my hotel, my property, my empire, I walked out onto the balcony and looked out at the ocean that had witnessed so many of my triumphs and failures over the years. Jasmine joined me at the railing, her expression thoughtful. "How do you feel, Mrs. Carter?" I considered the question carefully. How did I feel? Heartbroken, certainly. Betrayed, absolutely. Angry at the waste of love and opportunity that had brought us to this point. But underneath all of that, I felt something I had almost forgotten was possible. I felt free. "I feel like myself again," I said finally. For the first time in years, I feel like the woman who built all of this instead of the woman who apologizes for having built it. And Emma and Marcus, what happens with them? I smiled, thinking about my grandchildren and the relationship we could build now that it would be based on truth instead of lies. Emma and Marcus are going to learn what it means to have a grandmother who isn't ashamed of her success. They're going to learn about building things instead of just consuming them. They're going to learn that love doesn't depend on money, but respect does depend on how you treat people. As the sun began to set over the ocean, painting the sky in shades of gold and coral, I made myself a promise. I was never again going to diminish myself to make other people comfortable. I was never again going to apologize for being successful, intelligent, or capable. I was never again going to accept less respect than I deserved from anyone, family included. The empire I had built was still mine. The future I was creating was still ahead of me. And the woman who had built it all from nothing was still standing, still fighting, still winning. Some battles you win by compromise. Some battles you win by negotiation. Some battles you win by finding middle ground that everyone can accept. But some battles, the ones that matter most, you win by refusing to lose yourself in the process of trying to keep everyone else happy. Today I had won the most important battle of my life. Today I had chosen to remain R.C. Carter instead of becoming the diminished version of myself that my family found more comfortable. And tomorrow I would continue building the legacy I wanted to leave, not just for the grandchildren who would inherit my empire, but for the woman who had created it with her own hands, her own vision, her own uncompromising determination never to be less than she truly was. The useless old woman was gone forever. The empire's queen was back.